Hey there, friends. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to take a moment to welcome you. Whether you're here for the first time or you've been with us on this journey through military history, thank you for being here. Today's story is one that honestly left me speechless when I first learned about it. It's about sacrifice, about the quiet burden that soldiers carry, and about a mystery that took 4 decades to solve. This is the story of a young man in Vietnam who did something every single night that his brothers in arms could never understand. And when the truth finally came to light, it changed everything they thought they knew about war, about loss, and about the price of survival. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let me share this incredible tale with you. The Firebase sat on a hill in Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam, like a scar on the jungle's face. Firebase Razor, they called it. It was March 1969, and the men of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, had been holding this position for 6 weeks. The firebase was nothing special: sandbags, concertina wire, a few mortars, and a command bunker that leaked during the monsoon rains. But it was home, at least for now. Among the 63 Marines stationed there was a 20-year-old rifleman from Nebraska named Private First Class David Brennan. He had arrived in country 4 months earlier, fresh-faced and eager, though Vietnam had a way of stripping that eagerness away like paint from burning wood. Brennan was unremarkable in most ways. Average height, brown hair kept short under his helmet, a quiet kid who did his job and didn't complain. But there was something about him that the other Marines noticed, something that started about 3 weeks into their rotation at Firebase Razor. Every night, without fail, after the last light and before the watch rotation settled in, Brennan would grab his entrenching tool and disappear into the tree line just beyond the perimeter. He'd be gone for maybe 10-15 minutes. When he came back, his hands would be dirty, and he'd rinse them off at the water buffalo before heading to his hooch without a word to anyone. "Hey Brennan, what the hell you doing out there every night?" Corporal Mike Torres asked one evening as they sat cleaning their M16s. Torres was from El Paso, a stocky guy with a thick mustache who'd been in country for 8 months. Brennan looked up, his eyes distant. "Just something I gotta do, Corporal." "You burying bodies or something?" another Marine joked. A few guys laughed, but the laughter died quickly. Out here, even jokes had weight. "Nothing like that," Brennan said quietly. "Just personal." Torres watched him for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, man. Just don't get yourself killed doing whatever it is." The ritual continued. Every single night, rain or shine, whether they'd been in contact with the enemy or not, Brennan would take that entrenching tool and head into the darkness. The other Marines started calling it Brennan's Pilgrimage. Some thought he was burying letters. Others figured maybe he was hiding valuables, though what valuables a grunt in Vietnam would have was anyone's guess. A few of the more superstitious guys thought maybe he was performing some kind of ritual, something to keep himself alive. Firebase Razor saw its share of action. The NVA probed their perimeter regularly. Mortar rounds would scream in during the night. Firefights erupted in the jungle beyond the wire. Men were wounded. Some were killed. Through it all, Brennan fought like everyone else, competently, bravely, without complaint. But that nightly ritual never stopped. On April 12, 1969, the firebase came under heavy attack. It started just after 0200 hours with a barrage of mortar fire that sent everyone scrambling for cover. Then came the small arms fire, the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the heavier thump of RPGs. The NVA had chosen their moment well. It was a moonless night and the rain was coming down in sheets. "We got sappers in the wire," someone shouted over the chaos. Brennan was in his fighting position, firing controlled bursts into the darkness, trying to spot muzzle flashes. Next to him, Torres was calling in coordinates for artillery support on the radio. The battle lasted 3 hours. When dawn finally broke, the jungle was quiet again except for the moans of the wounded. They'd held the firebase, but the cost was high. 7 Marines were dead. 14 were wounded badly enough to require medevac. Among the dead was a lance corporal from Ohio named Jimmy Patterson, just 19 years old. He'd been hit by an RPG while manning one of the M60 positions. That evening, as the company buried their dead in temporary graves, they'd be moved to a proper cemetery later. The men noticed something. Brennan was there. his face streaked with mud and tears, but he didn't take his entrenching tool out that night. For the first time in weeks, the ritual was broken. "You all right, Brennan?" Torres asked. Brennan just shook his head. "Not tonight, Corporal. I can't tonight." But the next night, the ritual resumed, and it continued for 3 more months, until Charlie Company's rotation at Firebase Razor ended, and they were moved to a different AO. Brennan's mysterious nightly disappearances became such a fixture that new guys were told about it during their first week. "That's just Brennan," they'd say. "Don't worry about it." On July 23, 1969, during a patrol in the Ashau Valley, David Brennan's luck ran out. His squad walked into an ambush. Brennan took 2 rounds to the chest. The corpsman tried everything, but there wasn't much anyone could do out there in the jungle. Brennan died on the way to the medevac LZ, held in Torres's arms. "What were you burying, man?" Torres whispered as Brennan's breathing became shallow. "What was out there every night?" Brennan's lips moved. Torres leaned closer. The words were barely audible over the sound of the approaching helicopter. "Letters," Brennan whispered. "Letters home. That I couldn't send." Then he was gone. Torres didn't understand. Why bury letters? Why not just send them? But there was no time to dwell on it. The war moved on. Firebase Razor was eventually abandoned. The jungle reclaimed it. And David Brennan became another name on the wall in Washington, D.C., another young man who never came home. 40 years passed. Mike Torres became a grandfather. He ran a small auto shop in El Paso, and while he didn't talk about Vietnam much, he never forgot. He never forgot Firebase Razor, never forgot the friends he lost, and never forgot David Brennan and his strange nightly ritual. In 2009, a group of Vietnam veterans, Torres among them, organized a trip back to Vietnam. They wanted to visit the places they'd fought, to find some kind of closure. Torres specifically wanted to find Firebase Razor, or what was left of it. It took 2 days with a local guide, but they found it. The jungle had swallowed almost everything. Where bunkers once stood were now just depressions in the earth. The wire was gone, rusted away, or reclaimed by vegetation, but the hill was unmistakable. "This is it," Torres said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is Razor." There were 5 veterans with him, all men who'd served at the firebase at different times. They walked the perimeter, remembering. And then Torres thought about Brennan. He tried to remember where the tree line had been, where Brennan would disappear to every night. "Help me look for something," he told the others. They didn't know what they were looking for, but they searched anyway. It was one of the other veterans, a former sergeant named Bill McKinley, who found the first one. He was using a stick to poke around in the undergrowth when he hit something that wasn't wood or stone. "Mike, come here." Torres came over. McKinley had unearthed a small, rusted ammunition can, the kind Marines use to waterproof important items. Torres's hands shook as he pried it open. Inside were letters, dozens of letters, written on yellowed paper, sealed in plastic bags that had somehow survived 4 decades in the Vietnamese jungle. The ink was faded but readable, and every single one was addressed to the same person, Mrs. Eleanor Brennan, Norfolk, Nebraska. Torres opened one letter, his eyes scanning the careful handwriting. "Dear Mom, today we lost Jimmy Patterson. He was a good kid, always talking about his girl back home. I can't stop thinking about how his mother will get the news. I think about you getting that same news about me, and it makes me sick. I can't send you this letter because I don't want you to know how scared I am. I don't want you to know that I see my friends die and wonder when it'll be my turn. I write these letters to you every night, Mom, because it helps me feel like I'm talking to you. But I can't send them. I can't let you carry this fear with me. So I bury them instead. I bury the fear, the grief, the truth, and maybe if I bury them deep enough, they'll stay here in Vietnam where they belong, and I can come home to you clean. I love you, Mom. Your son, David." Torres couldn't read anymore. Tears blurred his vision. The other veterans stood around him in silence. They found 23 ammunition cans in total, buried in a rough circle near what had once been the firebase perimeter. Each can held letters, dozens upon dozens of them, over 400 letters in all, spanning the 3 months David Brennan had spent at Firebase Razor. Letters about fear, about loss, about the friends who died, about the violence he witnessed, about the parts of himself he felt dying in that jungle. Letters he wrote to his mother every single night to maintain his sanity, to process the horror, to hold on to his humanity. But letters he could never send because he didn't want to burden her with his pain. The veterans carefully packed all the letters and brought them back to the United States. Mike Torres personally traveled to Norfolk, Nebraska, to deliver them to Eleanor Brennan. She was 86 years old now, living in a nursing home. Her mind was mostly gone, claimed by Alzheimer's. She didn't remember much about her son anymore. But Torres read her one of the letters anyway, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. "He loved you very much, Mrs. Brennan," Torres said. "Every single night he was thinking of you. He just wanted to protect you from the war." For just a moment, something flickered in the old woman's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just a mother's eternal connection to her child. She squeezed Torres's hand. "My David," she whispered. "My sweet boy." The letters were eventually donated to the National Vietnam War Museum, where they remain today. They've been studied by historians and psychologists as a profound example of how soldiers cope with trauma, how they try to protect their loved ones even from thousands of miles away, and how the act of writing, even writing letters that would never be sent, can be a lifeline in the darkest of times. David Brennan never got to come home clean as he'd hoped. He never got to sit with his mother and tell her he was safe. But in a way, those buried letters became his voice, speaking across 40 years to tell a truth about war that is often hidden. The truth that soldiers carry two burdens, the one they bear in combat and the one they refuse to let their families carry with them. Every Memorial Day, a wreath is placed at David Brennan's grave in Norfolk, Nebraska, and sometimes visitors leave letters there, letters to their own loved ones, things they need to say but can't. The practice has spread. People from all over the country come to leave their unsent letters at David Brennan's grave, finding in his story permission to express their own unspoken pain. The jungle at Firebase Razor is quiet now, the violence long forgotten by the land itself. But those 23 holes in the ground, where a scared young man buried his truth every night, they told a story that will never be forgotten. You know, friends, stories like David's remind us of something incredibly important about the nature of sacrifice. We often think of military sacrifice in terms of the ultimate price, laying down one's life for your country, for your brothers in arms, and that sacrifice is real and profound. But there's another kind of sacrifice that doesn't get talked about as much, the emotional sacrifice that soldiers make to protect the people they love back home. David Brennan wrote over 400 letters to his mother that he never sent. Think about that for a moment. 400 times he sat down, probably exhausted, probably scared, and poured his heart out onto paper. And 400 times he chose to bury those words rather than let his mother carry his burden. That's a different kind of courage. That's a different kind of love. Research from the Vietnam War era, particularly studies conducted by the Department of Veterans Affairs between 1968 and 1975 in combat zones throughout South Vietnam, showed that nearly 70% of soldiers engaged in some form of therapeutic writing, letters, journals, poems, as a coping mechanism. Many of these writings were never sent home. Soldiers instinctively understood what psychologists now know, that writing can help process trauma, but sharing that trauma with loved ones can transfer the psychological burden. The Quang Tri Province region, where Firebase Razor was located, saw some of the heaviest fighting of the war, particularly during the 1968 Tet Offensive and the subsequent years of 1969-1970. Thousands of young men like David passed through those Firebase positions, and each one carried their own methods of survival, their own rituals, their own ways of staying human in inhumane circumstances. What makes David's story so powerful is its universality. Whether it's Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, or any conflict, soldiers have always faced this same dilemma. How much of the truth do I share? How much do I protect my family from? And in trying to answer those questions, they often take on an additional burden, the burden of silence, of secrecy, of buried pain. But here's what I want you to take away from this story. David's letters were eventually found. The truth came out, and in doing so, they've helped thousands of people, veterans and civilians alike, understand that it's okay to have feelings we can't share, It's okay to need private ways to process pain, and it's okay to protect the people we love from our struggles. But it's also okay, eventually, to let those buried truths come to light, because when they do, they connect us. They remind us of our shared humanity. So as we close out today's story, I want to ask you something, friends. Wherever you are right now, whether you're at home, at work, on a walk, or just passing time, take a second and drop a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. I love knowing that these stories reach people all across the country, all across the world. It reminds me that we're all connected by these shared experiences, these shared emotions, this shared respect for the men and women who've served. And if you have a veteran in your life, maybe give them a call today. You don't have to ask them about war. You don't have to make them relive anything. Just let them know you're thinking about them. Sometimes that's enough. Thank you so much for being here today, for listening to David Brennan's story, for honoring his memory and the memory of all those who served alongside him. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. Sending you all a big hug wherever you are. Stay safe, friends. Be safe.